So, hi everyone, and welcome again to the Live Better Connected podcast, where we talk about mobile technology, its benefits, and how it improves our daily lives. Now, today I am really thrilled. We've got with us Bryn who is a director of the Shared Rural Network, to take us through what that is, how it works, and how it's going to bring coverage to all parts of the UK. So, Bryn, welcome to the show.
Yeah, morning, Gareth. I'm really excited to be on this show. It's my first ever podcast, so looking to see how it all works, but really excited to be speaking to you today.
Well, you're certainly very welcome, and we'll ease you into it. Now, you are the director of the Shared Rural Network. Now, I've given a quick précis of sort of the Shared Rural Network as it extends coverage to rural areas, but I'm sure it's a lot more important than that. And please take us through, what is the Shared Rural Network?
Yeah, so the Shared Rural Network is a key government and mobile operator initiative to improve mobile coverage in the rural areas. So it's designed to remove the digital divide between urban and rural areas around connectivity, and with a major goal, really, of enabling rural businesses and communities to thrive.
And it specifically is to get to those sort of areas where there is no coverage at all. Now, what is the shared part of the Shared Rural Network mean? What is a shared part?
Okay, so the way the program's set up is that the government objective is to hit 95% geographic coverage across the UK, and each nation has its own different targets. Each MNO is or mobile network operator is responsible for getting their coverage up to 90%, and that's by eliminating what we call is the partial not spots. And those are the areas where one operator may have coverage, but another operator doesn't. So that's one part that we're eliminating. And then there's a government funded part of the program, which is to eliminate total not spots. So that's where we have areas where there is no coverage from any operator whatsoever. And that's delivering the shared element of that is that operators are building masts together that they will be sharing.
So all operators here, I think that's the key point, is that it's not just one operator extending into these rural areas and to 95% of the UK's landmass. This is all four of the key MNOs. And obviously on the back of that, all the MVNOs will benefit from that as well, which is your sort of virtual network operators. Now you say it's sharing, it's the mast, and this is, so they are working together, and they're putting up a mast, and then all four of them are putting their own equipment on that mast. Now you mentioned there's a sort of partial not spot element and a total not spot element. As you say, the sort of government funded bit, as I understand, is for the total not spot. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah. And there's two parts from that. It sounds quite complicated, but there are two parts to that. There's one where the operators will be building upon the emergency services network. And then there's another aspect where the operators are building shared masts, where they'll all be putting their own equipment onto those shared masts and improving coverage and eliminating not spots there.
And to reiterate, this is getting into rural areas. This is areas of the country where, it's our last wildernesses, areas of outstanding natural beauty, and areas where communities have sort of traditionally been cut off from sort of modern communications. Now, what does this bring to these areas? What are the benefits it brings to people in areas where, like the Scottish Highlands or North Wales, or areas around the Sperrins in Northern Ireland, for instance?
Okay, so I think what we seem to forget is that everybody's absolutely used to mobile coverage now, and we forget what happens where you don't have mobile coverage. The overall goal is to enable people to remain connected, and when you go into the wildland areas, it's designed to support people out and about rather than in their home. So if you think about lone workers, farmers, vets and doctors who are moving about in those areas where they don't have coverage, the benefits to them, truly enormous. They're not going to miss those important calls. There might be emergency calls that they need to take, and they can always stay connected. So that benefit is really helping to drive up connectivity and people staying connected in the area, but also helping to increase your business and help your business thrive.
Just to touch on that point, Bryn, business and the ability to communicate are sort of some things that in urban areas are very much taken for granted. And if we talk about, there's a big phrase coming out now, digital exclusion or inclusion, and if you're not part of that, some of the simple things we take for granted, for instance, two-factor authentication, so i.e. getting a text message to access your bank account, or wireless payments in your sort of farm deliveries and farm shops and the likes. This is all sort of something that we in a town and city would take for granted, but isn't always necessarily possible if you don't have that connectivity in a rural area.
Exactly right, and building on that, it's not just your banking, it's your government services, collecting social services credits, and accessing doctors, etc. All requires connectivity nowadays. So it's really enabling people to live in these areas, as I see it.
And what about some of the technological sort of changes that are happening? For instance, we've talked about drone technologies in agriculture, but equally also things like prescription deliveries. If for elderly people, especially in a rural area who don't have the opportunity to leave that house, these are all coming down the line. What other aspects do you see that are possible with that connectivity?
I think one of the things that I really believe that's important about what we're delivering and is how it can be used to benefit the environment. People often talk about masks and new masks and new coverage are detrimental to the environment. But if you think about what's really happening in the world with climate change, polluted rivers, endangered species, and the fact that we as a nation are doing lots to try and improve our environment. So whether it's clearing out chalk streams in Wiltshire, whether it's introduction of new species, sea eagles in Scotland, ospreys in Wales, beavers as well, and all the rewilding that's going on. Mobile connectivity can truly help support that through whether it's either the people on the ground doing the surveys, or whether it's new introduction of new technologies, so device monitoring, wildlife monitoring, or in agriculture, monitoring peatlands, monitoring rivers and seas, etc. There's a whole host that can be done. And I think, Gareth, I noticed that you posted a really good article about drone technology as well. When a drone has mobile connectivity, you're allowed to fly it out of sight. Yeah. And that then enables you to do surveys and do deliveries. So there have been cases, during the pandemic where drones were used to deliver medical aid to people out in these remote areas. So I think there's a lot of important things that can be done. And I think we always forget that technology is advancing all the time, and this coverage will be there, and people will find new applications and how it can be used to help protect the environment and benefit welfare as well in the area.
Bryn, I think that's an extremely important point, and you touched on a lovely plug to my article. We'll put that in the description. But equally, this coverage is not just about people. And I think one of the questions we often get is it only necessary in populated areas? You've mentioned things like ecology, saving endangered species. I think bringing in peregrine falcons and other birds of prey that had potentially sort of were going to be, endangered. And here we are, active programs which using sensors that can connect. So I think it's really important for to realize in this day and age that connectivity isn't just about people. It's also about the wildlife and the ecology and the environment, and also about businesses as well. We've got factories that are sort of private 5G networks building 5G factories of the future. So huge opportunities, and I think it's really worthwhile going into that. But equally, we're talking about these benefits, and yet we still find a real stream of sort of objections. This is areas of outstanding natural beauty. This is areas of the last wilderness parts of the UK. We're going 95% geographic landmass here. Why is it, do you think, that people are objecting? And what is the Shared Rural Network doing to ensure that this infrastructure is built sympathetically to these important areas?
The way I see it is, the key people who are objecting to this are really passionate about that area. Yeah, they're passionate about the beauty of the area. They're passionate about the environment. And they don't want to see that disturbed. And they are doing rewilding type projects in those areas. So they're concerned that the coverage will have an impact, that the mast will have an individual impact on that area. And that's one of their key objections. And so what we're doing, we are reaching out to work with these people who are objecting. But also, as part of our process in delivering sites, is we're very careful where we select and put sites. We have to make sure that we can build in those areas. But we have to do a whole host of surveys, environmental surveys, ecological surveys, understanding the wildlife in the area, and put in plans of how we will mitigate that. And we do a lot of visual impact assessments to see how that mast may look on the skyline and what we can do to reduce that impact. And there's a lot of cases where we've built sites as part of this program, as part of the wider Shared Rural Network program, where you can stand back and you can't really see the site. It's short, it's been painted in specific colors that match into the background. So we're trying to eliminate as much as we can. And then we're also talking to local planning authorities. They have the overall say of whether what we're doing for a site build has the minimal impact. But we're also working with them on biodiversity. So if we do have an impact, part of our goal is that we then have a scheme, a biodiversity scheme, that will mitigate that or compensate for that impact, and by adding by at least additional 10%. And so we're working now with those authorities of what's the best way to do that. Do we do lots of little small ones for each mast, or do we do one big one that has a really good impact for the environment?
So what you're saying is there's a huge amount of work that goes into ensuring they're in the right places, they are mitigated to be sympathetic to the environment. So it's, and I've had conversations as well with some of the technicians that have been working on this. There's a real attempt to provide real balance to having the essential connectivity that is needed, but also maintaining and protecting those areas. Now, that does bring me on to, these are areas, as we say, that are not the easiest necessarily to get to. It's you don't tend to have roads in some of these areas, and equally there's not really electricity or fibre on the top of a mountain or in the middle of somewhere on the highlands of Scotland. Now, what does that mean? If this isn't just about getting a truck in, putting a mast up, connecting it and going off, what are the difficulties in these areas?
The difficulties are quite enormous. They are rural, as you said, and to ensure that we reduce the number of actual sites that we need to improve coverage, we're tending to take the masts into higher areas, which means that they're further away from infrastructure. So the key challenge is, one, getting power to a site. So everybody thinks about mobile coverage as, it's just in the air, but each site will need power, and each site needs what we call is transmission, the ability to send data back to the network and to receive data from the network. And that's usually provided by fiber. From a transmission perspective, our challenge is fiber in the areas. And so we're working with BT Openreach and the Scottish R100 programme to understand where the fibre will be, and then how we take that fibre to the sites is usually through microwave links. So that's how we're meeting that challenge. Power is another challenge where we can get plug into the mains, as I call it, we call it on grid, connect to the grid network. That's the greenest way of delivering electricity to the site, because we can be using renewable energy from the grid. But we are looking at how, if we can't get electricity to that site, how we can use renewable energy. So we're looking at how we can use wind turbines to support it, how we can use solar arrays to provide the electricity, and working with batteries. And then the final aspect on the power is we know that we're going into areas where a lot of renewable energy is also being generated. So there's hydro farms and wind farms. So we're looking now to see, can we connect directly to those to eliminate or to enable us to get power, green power to those sites effectively.
So there's a real work here to be adding sustainability into this as well. I'd like to step on or to look at also some of the technicians that are building this network on our behalf. They are, again, it's areas that are potentially freezing cold, especially as we get into sort of the summer. Scotland very much, and midges are out as well. Kind of transport that they have to use isn't your normal sort of white van. It's quad bikes, and in some cases there's some really amazing pictures of helicopters bringing these masts into these areas.
Yeah, so the challenge, there is a lot of logistical challenge, how you get a steel structure and the relevant concrete, etc., to the site. And you're exactly right. I think if you go onto the web and certainly onto LinkedIn, you can see a site that's recently been built, which was using a helicopter build. So the helicopter brings the tower in, and then there's people on the ground who connect to it. In a number of cases, people to get to sites, we're using the all-terrain vehicles, and which are basically sort of like upscale go-karts that enable you to sort of travel across sort of the rugged hillsides where you don't have tracks. And we're looking at those also as ways of servicing the sites as well. And it's an interesting aspect of, again, on the impact of these sites is where we don't have to build access tracks. An access track is another thing that has an environmental impact and a visual impact. So using a helicopter build, for example, reduces the impact that we have on the visual side of a site as well. So there's a two-way sort of fold of that. One, it helps us get to those sites easily, but it's also a way of reducing the impact that site has on the environment.
So there's a huge amount of thought that goes into this, and I think sometimes it's lost that this is a hugely complex project, building in some of the most difficult and challenging areas of the country. Yet ultimately, it is here to extend coverage and provide benefits to people and, as we say, landscapes and businesses across the whole country. Now, I'd like to touch on one topic that continues to come up, as how do we get coverage into rural areas, and that is rural roaming. It's often put as a solution to extending this coverage, but why is the shared rural network the better solution?
It's interesting because rural roaming has come up for a long time into the mobile industry. Technically, it is complicated and has negative customer experience aspects to it as well as good customer experience aspects to it. But the bottom line is rural roaming only works where there at least one operator has coverage. And the areas that we're now addressing are the areas where there's no coverage at all. So sites do need to be built there. And it's far better to have a site where all four operators are sharing, and it enables the choice and the capacity, and enables a better customer experience in those areas that you have the individual sites and equipment. And then the other aspect I'd say about it is rural roaming isn't really future-proofed. It would be designed and work on one technology. And then as you move to newer technologies, you'll have to come up with new solutions. And so, but the bottom line is really, if you haven't got coverage, rural roaming won't deliver anything.
I think the fundamental point that I've taken from there is it is not a silver bullet. It's definitely not going to provide coverage where there is no infrastructure anyway, because you cannot roam where there is no infrastructure. Equally, I think there's a key point, as you say, is it's about ensuring that there is 100% capacity for all of the network operators' customers. They providing their own equipment, their own radio antennas, etc., rather than necessarily relying on another operator. Or equally, as you say, future-proofing. If one operator wants to upgrade and it's not the one that's in the incumbent there, they will have to wait for the other operator to upgrade. So it's allowing much more flexibility and, as you say, customer service. Now, thank you for that. I mean, one thing I'm sort of keen also to see is, where are we with the SRN? How are we doing with progress?
It was established in 2020, which is the same time as really the 5G licenses were created. And it's been built into the obligations, the license obligations into the network operators. And since then, there's been tremendous progress where for coverage that would not have been delivered has been delivered. So, for example, we've had 2,000 square miles, which is like the equivalent of Cheshire and Lancashire combined, area where at least one operator coverage is now there. Yeah. But furthermore to that, and probably more significantly, we now have 5,000 square miles, which is equivalent to about 60% of the size of Wales, where you're getting coverage from all four operators where you never had coverage. So, and that enables not just the coverage, but it enables choice as well in these areas. So people can start choosing what networks they want to connect to. And we continue to deliver all the time. So this year, for example, there's been coverage put into North Yorkshire, Skye, Shetlands. We're going to soon be announcing that there's more coverage happening in Wales. So the programme is continuously delivering coverage, and without it, that coverage would not exist.
And sites are going live as we speak, and coverage is being extended. I think this is a really, really fascinating project. It's got huge amounts of benefits to bring to the whole of the UK. It's a collaboration between all operators. So firstly, thank you, Bryn. I mean, I've learned so much about this. I hope listeners too. And what I'd like to say to everyone is obviously to learn more about this and to keep yourself updated, please do check the SRN website at srn.org.uk. And as ever, the Mobile UK website as well at mobileuk.org. As always, we are working hard to deliver more exciting podcasts about the mobile world and the benefits of mobile connectivity. So please do hit that subscribe button. And if you enjoyed this episode, we always would welcome a like. Now, remember to keep in touch and follow us on all our social media channels. And I look forward to seeing you again in the next episode. Thanks again.